Hello, Isaac here. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, and this is part 2 of a series going through chapters 10 to 11 of the book of Acts, where we look at the inclusion of Gentiles in the early church. So, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please comment, like and subscribe. But with that, let's get into it. So, in the last video, we had a look at the story of Peter and the Gentile Cornelius, who both had visions of God, which would bring them together, and it would give Peter the opportunity to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with this Gentile, beginning, as it were, the mission to the Gentiles. But what Peter learns through this vision and his interaction with Cornelius is incredibly important. For Peter says, "You yourselves know that it is unlawful for a Jew to associate with or to visit a Gentile, but God has shown me that I should not call anyone profane or unclean." And so he learns that he should not call a Gentile profane or unclean. But what do these concepts mean? Well, that is what we'll explore in this video as we delve deeper into what these concepts meant in the Hebrew Bible and Second Temple literature. So let's begin with the idea of holiness. So, we saw in the previous video how many first century Jews, but especially the Pharisees and the Qumran community, avoided close social interaction with Gentiles, which included not sharing meals with them or entering the home of a Gentile. The given reason from Peter is that Gentiles were unclean or profane. Now, these two concepts Peter mentions are the two fundamental binaries at the heart of Israel's existence. So let's begin with holiness and its opposite, profane. Now, the holy is that which is set apart to Israel's God for special use. The first use of the term holy or Kodesh in the Hebrew Bible comes in Genesis 2:3, where it tells us that God rested on the seventh day and he blessed it and he made it holy. But what makes the Sabbath day holy? Well, it is the presence of God that makes any day, place, object, or person holy. In other words, the Sabbath is holy because it is precisely when God made this world his dwelling place or his resting place. John Walton has emphasized this idea, stating that the Genesis account portrays creation as a cosmic temple, for in ancient times, temples were seen as places of divine rest. As he writes, in the ancient Near East, as in the Bible, temples are for divine rest, and divine rest is found in sanctuaries or sacred space. Therefore, the cosmos can be viewed as a temple, and the temple in Jerusalem a mini cosmos, and both are intimately connected through their purpose as divine resting place. But this rest is not about mere inactivity. In fact, temples were built so that deities could have a center for their rule. It is their residence or palace. Therefore, divine rest essentially means that turmoil and uncertainty is over, that the forces of chaos have been overcome, so that God can mount his throne and assume rule. For the Israelites then, the presence of God, which once filled the whole land, or at least Eden in Genesis, is limited to the Jerusalem temple, and this is God's resting place from which he rules his people. There are then degrees of holiness which extend out from his holy presence in the Jerusalem temple. In other words, the land of Israel is holy, but Jerusalem is holier. And within the city, the Temple Mount, Mount Zion, is the holiest place, but within the temple itself, the court of the priests is holier than the court of the Israelites. And within the court of the priests, the holiest place is the Holy of Holies, the very resting place of God. Now, within the Israelite community, there is then also a divinely ordained hierarchy from the most profane to the most holy members, and a distinction between lay Israelites and Levites, priests and high priests, which regulated access to the realm of the holy. This holy profane continuum is physically represented by the fact that each group is permitted entry only to certain areas of the sanctuary. The Israelites allowed in the courtyard of the sacrificial altar, the Levites entry to the inner area and tend to a variety of temple tasks. The priests minister in the auditorium in which incense altar is found, and the high priest is permitted enter the innermost shrine, the Holy of Holies, once a year on the day of purgation. But what about non-Israelites, foreigners or Gentiles? Well, they are ranked lower than lay Israelites and are inherently profane. Therefore, they cannot enter the realm of the holy, and not even the courtyard of the sacrificial altar in the temple, for their presence would defile it. This is strongly emphasized by the prophet Ezekiel in chapters 43 to 44, as he envisions the return from exile, restoration of the temple, and the return of the divine presence to the inner sanctuary, the Holy of Holies. However, he explicitly denies access to the new temple for Gentiles and criticizes Israelites for previously admitting foreigners uncircumcised in heart and flesh to be in my sanctuary. And he adds, "Thus says the Lord God, no foreigner uncircumcised in heart and flesh of all foreigners who are among the people of Israel shall enter my sanctuary." Therefore, Gentiles are profane because they neither have the outward sign of the covenant, which for males is circumcision, nor the inward disposition, the circumcision of the heart of someone that keeps the covenant, worships Yahweh and not idols, and obeys the Mosaic law. In other words, if Gentiles were to enter the temple, they would defile it, and the presence of God would depart from it. Now, there is also a possibility that the mere presence of foreigners in the land of Israel would defile that holy land as well as the sanctuary. For example, Joel 3 speaks of a time when God will restore the fortunes of Israel who have been scattered among the nations, and that God will dwell in Zion, and this would make all of Jerusalem holy. It states in verse 17, "So you shall know that I, the Lord your God, dwell in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem shall be holy, and strangers shall never again pass through it." This passage suggests that the implication of the holiness of Jerusalem is that strangers or non-Israelites should not even pass through it, as they would defile the holy land. But it's not just the land of Israel or Jerusalem that is holy. In fact, the people of Israel are set apart as holy. As Leviticus 19:2 makes clear, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." According to Leviticus 21:14 to 15, the high priest must preserve his holiness by observing genealogical purity and marrying a virgin from within Israel, and not a foreigner, as he would profane the holy priesthood. But we also find in Ezra and Nehemiah that all Israelites, and not merely the priests, are, as Ezra 9:1 states, a holy seed, distinct from the profane seed of the Gentiles. In other words, they should not marry Gentiles, as they would lose their special status from the surrounding nations. The basis of this can be found in the prohibition on intermarriage with Canaanites in Deuteronomy 7:2-5, which is then followed by a statement in verse 6 regarding the holiness of Israel. It reads, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you out of all the peoples on earth to be his people, his treasured possession." We then find in Ezra 10:1-44 and Nehemiah 13:23-31 that returning exiles to Jerusalem who had married foreign wives were told to separate from them, and these foreign wives as well as children were sent away because they profaned the holy seed of Israel. However, there is a possibility that foreigner could be incorporated into the people of Israel and thus become holy if they undergo the entry ritual of circumcision, worship Yahweh alone, and adopt the Torah. For example, Isaiah 56, 3-7 criticizes those who exclude foreigners from participating in the cult of Israel, instead stating that if they have joined themselves to the Lord, keep the Sabbath, hold fast to the covenant, which could mean circumcision of the flesh and the heart, they should be welcomed and rejoice in the Lord's house, as it says, "And the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants, all who keep the Sabbath and do not profane it, and hold fast to my covenant, these I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples." However, there were Jews in the first century who completely ruled out the possibility of a foreigner joining the people of Israel. For example, in the Book of Jubilees, a pseudepigraphal work from the 2nd century BC, which was popular among the Dead Sea Scroll community, it concludes, based on Genesis 17:12, that persons circumcised after the 8th day will always be considered a foreigner and treated as though they were uncircumcised. It states, "And everyone that is born, the flesh of whose foreskin is not circumcised on the 8th day, belongs not to the children of the covenant which the Lord made of Abraham, but to the children of destruction. Nor is there, moreover, any sign on him that he is the Lord's, but he is destined to be destroyed and slain from the earth, and to be rooted out of the earth, for he has broken the covenant of the Lord our God." Therefore, on this basis, there is no possibility for Gentile conversion, or any possibility of foreigners becoming part of the holy people of Israel, as they are permanently excluded, since they are not circumcised on the 8th day. Now, to summarize, then, God is holy, and in order to come into God's presence, people must also be set apart as holy. The Israelites, who were circumcised both in heart and flesh, were considered to be a holy people, but in order to enter the very presence of God, one had to be set apart as a high priest and have priestly descent. However, when it comes to foreigners, their very presence was believed to defile the temple and potentially the land of Israel and the holy seed of Israel. But if they joined themselves to Israel, becoming circumcised both in heart and flesh, they could become equal covenant partners. Nevertheless, there were some who rejected this and believed that foreigners could never truly be members of the people of Israel, since they were not circumcised on the 8th day. Okay, that is it for holiness. Next, we're going to look at the category of purity. Now, intrinsically linked to holiness is the concept of purity or cleanliness, as someone who is set apart as holy cannot enter a holy space unless they are in a state of ritual purity. The legislation on ritual purities can be found in Leviticus 12:15 and Numbers 19, where it tells us that certain impurities are contracted from human corpses, animal carcasses, childbirth, menstruation, sexual intercourse, abnormal genital discharges, and scale disease in both people and houses. What we find here is that ritual purity is basically unavoidable and not blameworthy. However, if someone is in a state of ritual impurity and they enter a sacred space, they would be committing a sin, as they would be polluting that holy space. Moreover, if the sacred space reaches a certain level of impurity, it is believed that God would abandon it. Therefore, someone in a state of ritual impurity must remove that impurity through ritual washing and bathing, or in some cases a sacrifice, before they can enter a holy space. This holy space is the temple in Jerusalem. In other words, someone doesn't need to remain ritually pure outside the temple, Nonetheless, there were groups in the first century, such as the Pharisees and the Essenes, who did try to keep the laws of ritual purity outside of the temple, eating everyday meals in a state of ritual purity, as though they were priests in the temple, as the scholar Jacob Neusner writes. The Pharisees held that even outside of the temple, in one's home, one had to follow the law of ritual purity in the only circumstance in which they might apply, namely at the table. They therefore held that one must eat his secular food, that is, ordinary everyday meals, in a state of ritual purity, as if one were a temple priest. The Pharisees thus arrogated to themselves and to all Jews equally the status of the temple priest, and did things which priests must do on account of that status. The table of every Jew in his home was seen to be like the table of the Lord in the Jerusalem temple. The commandment, "You shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy people," was taken literally. The whole country was holy. Thus there arose, from a desire to extend the holiness of the temple to the whole of Jerusalem, as well as for all lay Israelites to be a royal priesthood, a practice of keeping the purity laws outside of the temple, specifically in one's home when partaking of everyday meals. In fact, in the Gospels, the Pharisees criticize Jesus for eating with defiled hands and not eating everyday meals in a state of ritual purity. They ask him in Mark 7:5, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" Now, an important characteristic of ritual purity is that it conveys an impermanent contagion. In other words, in a state of ritual impurity, someone can defile someone else within their physical reach. For example, contact with a corpse can last 1 week, menstruation roughly a week, or the defiling state left after giving birth 33 or 66 days. But when it comes to genital flows, scale disease and house funguses, they can last an unspecific time, as it's emphasized that the individual with these major impurities are to remain isolated from the community for the period of their affliction to restrict social contact. This is what Leviticus 13:45-46 tells us about this. "The person who has the leprous disease shall wear torn clothes, and let the hair of his head be dishevelled, and he shall cover his upper lip, and cry out, 'Unclean, unclean.' He shall remain unclean as long as he has the disease. He is unclean. He shall live alone. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. Therefore, those who are experiencing certain severe impurities should not only avoid sacred spaces, but quarantine themselves so that they do not inadvertently pass on that impurity to others who might then encounter a sacred space." Now, it's difficult to fully comprehend the purpose of ritual impurity today, but it's important to understand that it was a central and integral feature of most, if not all, ancient cultures. Whether that is the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Hittites, Greek or Romans, they all had similar concepts of ritual impurity. An ancient Judean people and the Hebrew Bible is not unique in that regard. In other words, it was universally assumed and comprehensible, and as such it didn't need to be explained. But how might we explain it? Well, Jacob Milgrom, in his landmark work on Leviticus, argued that ritual impurities were essentially associated with death, and that the purpose of the ritual impurity system is to drive a wedge between the forces of death and the forces of life, the holy God of Israel. Others have argued that it's not so much about death, but mortality in general, and the fact that humans are born and die, which is distinct from the realm of the holy and from a God who is immortal, without beginning or end, birth or death. Regardless of one's interpretation, it is important to understand the significance of this concept of purity to Jewish, and all ancient cultures for that matter. But besides this concept of ritual purity, there is also another related idea which we find in the Hebrew Bible, which is moral impurity. So, besides ritual impurity, there is, as Jonathan Clawens and Christine Hayes have argued, a separate category in Leviticus of moral impurity. The foundation of moral impurity is the Holiness Code in Leviticus 18 to 26, whereby certain practices or deeds, namely murder, sexual violations, or idolatry, are thought to generate an impurity which defile the sinner, the land of Israel, and the sanctuary. This is what Leviticus 18, 25-28 says about these impurities. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways. By all these practices, the nations I am casting out before you have defiled themselves. Thus the land became defiled, and I punished it for its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my ordinances, and commit none of these abominations, either the citizen or the alien who resides among you. For the inhabitants of the land who were before you committed all these abominations, and the land became defiled. Otherwise, the land will vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. Therefore, certain moral impurities, such as murder, sexual violations, and idolatry, are what the Canaanites committed before Israel possessed the land, which polluted it and resulted in them being vomited out. The warning for Israel is if they repeat the sins of the Canaanites, they will suffer the same fate, which they did, resulting in the Syrian and Babylonian exiles. Ezekiel 36, 17-18 illustrates how moral impurities such as murder and idolatry led to the defilement of the land by the Israelites. And he likens this moral impurity to ritual impurity, such as menstruating woman entering the sanctuary. It says, "Mortal, when the house of Israel lived on their own soil, they defiled it with their ways and their deeds. Their conduct in my sight was like the uncleanliness of a woman in her menstrual period. So I poured out my wrath upon them for the blood that they had shed upon the land, and for the idols with which they had defiled it." Now, with moral impurity, there is no purification rite akin to that associated with ritual impurity, such as the ritual washing or bathing. Instead, moral impurity is attained through punishment, atonement, or by not committing those morally impure acts in the first place. Furthermore, there is no contagion associated with moral impurity, meaning that the Gentile or Jewish sinner do not defile those within his or her physical reach, as with ritual impurity. However, close association with individuals engaging with morally impure acts does increase the risk of someone committing those acts themselves. This close association includes, first and foremost, intermarriage. Deuteronomy 7, 1-4 and Exodus 34, 14-16 prohibited marriage with men or women from the 7 Canaanite nations. The given reason is that they are idolatrous and will lead astray any Israelites they marry. The consequence of this is in fact referenced throughout Israelite history. For example, King Solomon is led astray to worship other gods because of the influence of his many foreign wives. This is made clear in 1 Kings 11, 1-2, as it says, "King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from the nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, 'You must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods.' Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love." But besides intermarriage, the broader implication is that Jews should avoid any close association with Gentiles just as the intimacy of sharing a meal in a home, due to the potential negative influence. This position is reflected, as we have previously seen, in the Book of Jubilees, which states that the Gentile inhabitants of the land in Israel are defiled due to their idolatry and sexual sins, and that Jews should separate from them and not eat with them. It can also be found in the Gospels, where the Pharisees are consistently critical of Jesus because he ate with tax collectors and sinners. Moreover, in the Talmud, in Tosefta of the Dazara, it rules out eating in the home of a Gentile, even if they brought their own food, on the grounds that they are idolatrous. A Gentile who made a banquet for the wedding of his son and invited all the Jews of his city, even though they bring and eat their own food and drink their own wine, and their own servant serves them, Scripture regards them as though they had eaten from sacrifices of corpses. As it is said, "He shall invite you, and you shall eat from his sacrifices." This likely mirrors the viewpoint of the Pharisees in the New Testament. The passage suggests that dining with Gentiles in their own home was equivalent to participating in idolatrous sacrifices in a pagan temple. Therefore, as Peter states, Gentiles were considered profane and unclean. Firstly, uncircumcised Gentiles were seen as inherently profane, and their presence defiled the sacred temple, as well as potentially the land and descendants of Israel. Only by attaching themselves to Israel through circumcision of both heart and flesh could they enter a holy space. But there were some Jews that did not accept the legitimacy of any Gentile conversion, as they had not been circumcised on the 8th day. Secondly, Gentiles were viewed as morally impure or unclean, due to their practice of idolatry, murder, and sexual immorality, as stated in Leviticus 17:26. As a result, close association with Gentiles, whether through marriage or shared meals, increased the risk of Israelites committing the moral impurities of them, which would pollute the Holy Land and result in them being expelled like the Canaanites before them. Additionally, the Pharisees or Essenes ate everyday meals in a state of ritual purity, as if they were priests in the temple, which certainly made table fellowship with them difficult for Jews, let alone Gentiles. Nonetheless, I believe that Peter learns two important lessons in Acts 10-11, and we'll delve into them in the next video. But briefly, I think that he first realizes that he should not refer to Gentiles as profane or impure, and use this as an excuse for avoiding association with them. Secondly, he recognizes that Gentiles who have received the gift of the Holy Spirit through faith in Christ Jesus and baptism in his name, in fact become holy and morally pure, and are equal covenant partners in the kingdom of God, but as Gentiles, without the need for circumcision. So, those 2 points we'll be exploring in more detail in the next video. So again, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye!